Accessibility is far more than options in the menu. Our reviewer, Grant Stoner, lost the capability to play with standard console controllers in 2019. Due to the progressive nature of his physical disability, his hands can no longer comfortably press buttons or move sticks unless a device is placed in a very specific position on a flat surface. And with the ergonomic nature of a DualSense controller, he had yet to play a PlayStation 5 game because of this issue. Now, with the release of the PlayStation Access controller, he can finally enjoy Sony's exclusive games again, albeit not without some frustration and discomfort. The Access controller is PlayStation's answer to accessible hardware. While their studios continuously innovate with inclusive designs and accessible features, the lack of hardware was noticeable, especially considering the release of the Xbox Adaptive Controller way back in 2018. And now with its release, it proves that there is no singular solution for the disabled experience, especially in gaming. Before exploring the design and physical features of the Access controller, it's important to evaluate what makes this device successful. Excellent software. Customization and personalization are key, especially when creating devices for a disabled audience with individualistic needs based on their disabilities. For starters, every button is customizable, not only with its placement, but also its functionality. Even though every console offers the capability to reassign button mapping, here you can customize if pushing a button is treated as a single press and release or a hold. Traditionally, you would need to search a game's options menu hoping to find a setting that enables toggles for actions like aiming, sprinting, or crouching. Now, you could simply assign button 1 as R1 and select a setting to have the controller behave as if R1 is being held until pressed again. This feature by itself is revolutionary with accessible hardware because it means we no longer have to implore developers to include that option or patch it into older games. Should these settings always be included in games? Absolutely. But they're no longer inaccessible without them. Beyond activating toggles, the Access controller software lets you choose the orientation of the control stick. The Access controller requires you to choose the position of the stick via turning the controller facing upwards, left, right, or downwards before enabling control customization. The positioning can be changed at any time, but Grant chose to have the control stick facing downwards, allowing him to comfortably rest his hand on the edge of the table. Further, 2 Access controllers can be paired with the PS5 simultaneously and function as one, meaning it's possible to have 2 separate stick placements. Finally, the Access controller enables the use of 3 distinct profiles, each with their own custom button assignments and toggles. While this feature is not new, both Xbox and Nintendo allow for multiple control customization profiles. The Access controller implements it smoothly and lets you seamlessly switch with the press of a button. Currently, Grant has profiles established for less complex games like turn-based RPGs, button-heavy games like Spider-Man 2, and a standard profile he uses when trying out a new game for the first time. It's a feature that allows others to comfortably switch between multiple games per session without needing to reconfigure and memorize new button combinations with each game. The profile button is one of his favorite features, but it also highlights his biggest criticism of the Access controller. From a software perspective, the Access controller is an accessibility achievement. From a physical design examination, it's a perplexing conundrum that often leaves him physically exhausted after playing for hours. As mentioned previously, the ability to switch between profiles is incredible, but the strength required to press the button to do so is beyond what he can physically accomplish. Located on the side of the joystick, the profile button is egregiously small, and it requires such force that he cannot switch profiles without the assistance of others. Grant notes that every time he tries a new game and wishes to change his current control layout, he needs to find someone to press the button for him. It severely hinders the independence of physically disabled players by requiring others for something as simple as a button press. And unfortunately, the strength required to push the button is not exclusive to this specific one. 8 of the 9 main buttons of the access controller can be difficult to press, especially depending on which of the 4 button caps are placed onto the controller. When playing straight out of the box, the primary button caps are curved hill-like domes, which Grant states were automatically too difficult for him to use. Fortunately, the box contains 3 other cap types: a flat button with a slight decline, a thicker button with an upward curve, and an angled cap which hangs over the central black button. After switching caps, it was far easier for him to use the device, but the access controller box only contains approximately 4 of each of the cap types. Anybody who needs more than what is offered will be required to purchase another controller, an $89.99 expense, because the button caps are not offered for sale separately. Thankfully, he was able to successfully use a mixture of different caps to play, but even so, he was only able to use a limited amount of buttons because he can't use the entirety of the controller. The access controller shape poses the biggest barrier. Its circular design is not accessible for disabled players like Grant with smaller hands, atrophied hands, or limited reach. Of the 9 available buttons, he notes he only has access to 4, and because it's a circle, no matter which direction he places the controller, the issue remains. This problem can be mitigated with software capabilities like using a DualSense alongside the access controller, a similar feature to Xbox's Copilot. This is Grant's preferred setup and one which is the most comfortable, but he notes he still loses access to 5 buttons. While it's even possible to pair 2 access controllers with a DualSense, if an individual cannot move their hands across one access controller, 2 is simply out of the question. To compensate for a physically disabled player's inability to reach any of the buttons, the controller includes 4 standard 3.5mm ports located directly across from the joystick. Grant states that he was able to place some of his existing adaptive equipment into these ports, namely leftover switches from his Logitech adaptive gaming kit, which is currently available for $99.99. This solution works, but he does wish the access controller featured more inputs for modifications. The physical design and accompanying equipment do have some benefits. The access controller includes 3 joysticks, a large ball like a wheelchair joystick, a small cap like a Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, and a ridged stick that mirrors what is traditionally found on most console controllers. Combine that with the software settings that allow you to freely adjust the sensitivity, and Grant notes that he never became exhausted from using the stick. His preferred choice is the standard ridged option. And there is even a singular button cap that falls across 2 buttons for easier access and can be used with software options that combine a single button into 2. Grant acknowledges that for the first time since 2019, he can finally resume trophy hunting and play some of the most accessible PlayStation games such as Spider-Man 2. However, while he genuinely enjoyed the access controller and is thoroughly impressed by the software that powers it and enables options like turning buttons into toggles and on-the-fly profile swapping, he was left disappointed by the somewhat narrow target audience for this controller. Rather than design a device for physically disabled players with limited reach or atrophied hands, PlayStation instead seems to have focused on individuals who can either move their arms or extend their hands across the entire controller and push buttons with a high level of strength. Hopefully, future iterations will include more ports. Grant ultimately wants the industry to understand that, if anything, the access controller is proof that the disabled experience is not universal. Will this device benefit every physically disabled player? No, but it's a necessary tool. For more accessibility coverage, check out Grant's column Access Design over on IGN.com, and for everything else, keep it right here. Also on IGN.com.